Pelé, Ronaldo, Neymar, Ronaldinho. 5 World Cup titles, more than any country on earth. The next best is Germany and Italy, with 4 each. Brazil did not dominate football by accident. They did it until the entire sport started trying to become them. At the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, a 17-year-old kid named Pelé stepped onto a football pitch and was so good that the journalists could not describe what they were seeing in normal football language. They just called it the beautiful game. Pelé scored 2 goals in the final. Brazil beat the host nation, Sweden, 5-2. The whole world watched. Nobody had ever seen football played like that. 4 years later, in 1962, Pelé got injured and didn't finish the tournament. Brazil won again anyway. Their replacement weapon was a man named Garrincha, born with a curved spine, one leg shorter than the other. He became widely regarded as the greatest right winger in the history of the sport. Think about what that tells you. Brazil could lose their best player mid-tournament and still win, with a man who shouldn't have been able to play at all. They called it jogo bonito, the beautiful game. Football arrived in Brazil in the 1890s, brought by a British-Brazilian man named Charles Miller, who literally carried 2 footballs back from England in his luggage. Back then, it was a sport for wealthy white Brazilians, played in clubs, organized and respectable. That lasted about 20 years. Then the poor kids got a hold of it, and they started playing it everywhere they could. Street corners, beach sand, dirt patches, behind factories, anywhere that could hold 2 goals and a ball. They called it Pelada, which translates roughly as playing football in the naked environment. No referee, no structure. You earn your place in the game by being good enough to stay on the pitch. They play because they love it, and in that environment, they teach each other. Creative techniques pass between players not through coaching manuals, but through trying things. Now, here is where the science comes in. In the 1940s, because there simply were not enough grass pitches, Brazilian kids started playing a faster, tighter version of the game on basketball courts, in school halls, on streets, 5 players per side, smaller, heavier ball, barely any space. They called it Futsal. In 2016, researcher Luca Opici conducted a study called Transfer of Skills from Futsal to Football in Youth Players, funded by UEFA. He took 2 groups of players and tested them across both sports. Futsal-trained players, when switched to 11-a-side football, performed on average 6 more technical actions per minute than players who had only ever trained in traditional football. Research cited across multiple sports science journals suggests players in futsal receive the ball up to 6 times more often than in 11-a-side football. Think about what that means. A child growing up in Brazil in the 1960s or 70s was touching a ball more in a single afternoon of street play than a child in a European academy was touching in an entire week of structured training. Ronaldinho, twice FIFA World Player of the Year and Ballon d'Or winner, has credited futsal with developing the touch and dribbling that defined his game. Lionel Messi, though Argentine, has also spoken about how playing futsal as a child helped shape him as a footballer. When a child plays without a coach, they have to make every decision themselves. Nobody tells them when to pass, nobody tells them how to dribble. The brain is forced to improvise, forced to generate solutions that do not exist in any manual. That is what jogo bonito looks like from the outside. Here is where the beautiful days of Brazilian football seemed to start fading away. Brazil's street football culture started changing in the 1980s and 1990s. Cities grew faster, open spaces disappeared, safety concerns kept children inside, and then money entered football at a scale that changed everything. European clubs noticed what Brazilian streets were producing, and they did what markets always do when they find something valuable. They started buying. Talent drain is the polite term. Young Brazilian players began leaving for Europe earlier and earlier, where players like Zico and Falcao had moved abroad in their late 20s after years of development on Brazilian streets and pitches. By the 1990s, talents like Ronaldo were being purchased at 17. By the 2000s and 2010s, players were sometimes signed by European clubs before they even turned 18. The clubs back in Brazil responded rationally. If European clubs would pay for talent, they would produce talent to sell. They built academies, structured training programs, youth systems modeled on European ones. A 2021 study found that just 1 in 5 youth football academies in Brazil is free to attend. The rest cost money. The kids who used to play Pelada for free, the ones from the favelas, the ones without boots, are now often outside the system entirely. And those academy pitches, multiple coaches have noted that synthetic, perfectly level surfaces develop players differently from the rough, uneven, unpredictable ground where so many legends first learned the game. You learn different things when the ground does not behave the way you expect. All of these changes seem to have negatively impacted Brazilian gameplay. Let me take you to the 8th of July 2014 World Cup semi-final, Brazil versus Germany. Brazil hosted the tournament for the first time in 64 years. By halftime, Germany led 5-0. They scored 4 goals in 6 minutes. The final score was 7-1. Brazilian fans watching at Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro started crying before halftime. Grown men and children. Brazil's own coach, Luiz Felipe Scolari, said, "I'm going to be remembered because I lost 7-1, the worst defeat in Brazil's history." That game had a name by the next morning, the Mineirazo. A former Brazil midfielder said, "Germany taught us how to play football." Sit with that for a second. Germany teaching Brazil how to play football? Here is the part that makes that sentence almost unbearable. Germany had spent the previous decade overhauling their development system, building structures that tried to balance technical coaching with creative freedom. More touches, more improvisation, more small-sided games, more of the things that Brazil had always done for free, on streets, without needing to be told. Germany became more Brazilian. Brazil became more industrialized. And on one July evening in 2014 on Brazilian soil, the result was 7-1. Victor Hugo da Silva, a coach at Flamengo's youth academy, said in 2024, "Our technique has suffered. The playing style changed, and that ended up taking away some of our creativity. Our football used to be so joyful. Used to be." This is what happens when you take something that worked, something organic, and you put a price on it. The street does not have a price. You cannot buy Pelada. You cannot franchise the feeling of a kid spending hours touching a ball because no one told him to stop. Every country that tried to copy Brazil copied the surface. What they could not copy is 10,000 hours of playing because you loved it. Pelé, Ronaldo, Neymar, Ronaldinho, none of them were built in a system. They were built in the street. That Brazil still exists, somewhere in a narrow alley in Sao Paulo. And maybe, if the street survives long enough, the world will get to see that Brazil again.